really happy to introduce the pro today, Dr. Kramer, who is the chair of the Department of Med Ed and the M1 curriculum coordinator, which means he's in charge of the whole educational content that gets delivered to the first year medical students. Even that, I think, is a while. It takes a while to learn that definition.
Yes.
What the heck is a curriculum coordinator? What's an M1?
Yeah.
So anyway, so thank you very much for being here, and slides discussion, lunch is on the way. So we have until noon. I have
a little bit before. We're gonna cut out 10 minutes before, so people can get to the
oh yeah, we have
seminar.
We have seminar for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right.
Thanks, Laura.
Yep.
So let me introduce myself a little bit more because I've seen you guys around in the hallways, but you might not know that 13 years ago I was sitting here in biomedical science. We didn't have this nice presentation. Thank you, Laura. But I came to Creighton 13 years ago in biomedical sciences from NIH. I had a lab there for 8 years, just doing research. And I'm an anatomist by training. Just so during graduate school, I took and taught anatomy, but had a love for research, and that took me to NIH. But somewhere along the way of my time at NIH, my wife said to me, "You don't seem as happy as you were." So, long story short, I was looking for a place. Well, long story short, looking for a place that valued teaching, brought me to Creighton. We've been really happy since. So what I'm going to talk to you today about was, while I had some training on it when I was in graduate school, most of this is things you learn along the way. And so I'm hoping to help with your learning curve, I guess would be a good way to put it. All right, so talk a little bit right at the beginning here about teaching at Creighton. And what that means, because it's definitely different than teaching at some other places. More than anything, we're going to spend most of the time on preparing to teach. What are some concrete things that you can do? I'm going to hopefully give you some useful tools here to help in that preparation. And then depending on the amount of time we've got, I'll talk a little bit about the curriculum because, as Laura mentioned, it takes a while just to wrap your head around the curriculum. And I think more importantly, you guys are probably interested in how can I contribute to this? So I'll give you some suggestions there at the end. All right. So the first thing, and this might be intuitively obvious, but just to make sure we're all on the same page here, right? Presenting a research symposium is not the same thing as teaching, right? And while that might seem obvious, there's definitely different ways that we need to approach teaching that you wouldn't do necessarily for teaching or just delivering a presentation. And hopefully one of the things you walk away from today is that having an active, engaged classroom, you hopefully use a lot of different verbs. Okay, you might understand what the heck I'm trying to say right now. But that should be evident here as we go through. So, for example, pretty lecture style, much like a presentation. There's a lot of listening going on, right? Maybe not a lot of learning. Whereas in particularly in active, oh gosh, darn it. Every time I'm in this room, I use the get too close to it. No. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, you can try yes.
Just hit yes and then it'll be okay.
We'll probably come back.
All right. I'll save this. In active learning.
I have to do that several times.
Okay. Yeah, I missed this
Yeah, we should have to fix that.
So what you see in an active learning classroom, I just came from TVL this morning with our first year medical students, team-based learning, is that there's a lot more than just listening going on. And so we're going to talk about some strategies to to incorporate this kind of active teaching into the course or into your sessions. So here we go.
Advance your slide while that's up on the screen.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna click it and advance the slide.
There we go. We'll work with it. Thankfully, I don't have a lot of slides here at the beginning at least. So I'm going to start with, as a teacher, something really where you need to start, and that was with what are the learning objectives. So normally I wouldn't show my learning objectives at the very beginning. They're made available to students, but we're going to do it here just to kind of emphasize some things. So you can see in italics here are some good active verbs, all right? And they're the hallmark of any learning objective. But using the right verbs should help direct exactly the activities in the classroom that you should be doing. Okay, so it's definitely a take home from today. So we'll talk just one slide here, a couple minute discussion among the group about what it means to teach the Creighton, specifically Ignatian pedagogy. We'll spend almost all our time here talking about how you use Bloom's taxonomy. That might bring PTSD to anybody that's heard Bloom's taxonomy before. Hopefully we'll make it a little easier. But using it for the kind of the three things you really need to plan: learning objectives, assessment questions, and instructional activities. And as I mentioned, I hope at the end here you can at least summarize the MD curriculum. All right, so
Comes up again.
all right, so Jesuit education, as you can see, good number of universities and high schools across the United States in particular, but they all have these similar values. And you guys have seen these values if you walk around campus on banners, whatnot. What I'm really going to focus on is here. The Ignatian pedagogy is this method of really active learning. Okay, really getting the Ignatian pedagogy. There's 5 different steps, but the idea here is that you have active components to it with reflection or evaluation kind of spread in between. So you're actively both engaging with the students and kind of encouraging them and both yourself to look at how well that's going. All right. So I've got some handouts here, at least for those that are here for the part. I don't know if anybody else wants one of these little handouts. Here, I'll spend all of that. Here,
Thanks.
I know you need that.
Hopefully.
All right, so what I encourage you to do, we'll just take a minute, look through, particularly on the right-hand side with the Ignatian pedagogy, and like to get some feedback. Have you experienced any of these bullet points at Creighton? And if you could give me an example, that'd be great.
Well, I know that I'm gonna start since the room's so quiet, but I think just Creighton's focus, emphasis on quality education, teaching and good quality teaching as a real high level priority for the university altogether and also in the School of Medicine. So different from some R1 institutions where faculty are hired and they do their research and maybe they do a little crappy teaching, but nobody's really interested in the quality of that. Here, everybody who goes up for tenure promotion, the quality and at least some small quantity of teaching is a real criterion that's part of the, requirement for tenure promotion.
Fully agree.
So you're not last most
Thanks.
I like the aspect here of eloquential, speaking and writing excellence. And I don't know, in my experience early on versus maybe now, one of the things that students really comment on in their evaluations is how clear you make things. And I remember starting out, you tend to blather a little bit and it confuses students. And as you gain more experience in front of the classroom, you tend to use a little bit more brevity and conciseness to get your points across, and the students appreciate that. And I've seen some of my peers give lectures that I sit back and I go, wow, I wish I could speak like that. It's very direct, pointed, concise, and I've tried to model that when I'm teaching.
So I'm curious, is there anything you consciously did to make that switch? Because I fully agree.
Well, yeah, consciously, I'm always trying to be aware in the classroom when I'm sort of getting off point or blathering a little bit, and try to bring things back around to the main points. I guess just practice makes perfect. Is part.
For me, I find that I was much more attentive to the students' reactions. And the more I get that. So as soon as I saw them start to, okay, they're getting bored or they're searching on their computers. Okay, it's time to move on to something else. Or if the opposite, right? They have no idea what's going on. All right, let's back up.
That's a great point, because when you start out, you tend to be looking at your own slides more as you speak.
Yeah.
And as you become more comfortable with the material in your own slides and the points you want to make, you start to watch the students more.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, just the little tweaks you can make to your lectures, or you can take a step back when you look in the audience and you see their faces going, like what? Or they're nodding. Yeah, I get it. It's like it helps you know when you can move on or when you need to take a step back and explain things.
Yeah.
I think I've been going through some of these CFE active learning classes, and that's been very good as well. Although I'm not taught great in that, or say what I was there before. And one of the things that I actively try to change in how I approach is a couple of things. Use kind of like, it's fancy jargon, but it's essentially really effective. Declarative language and evoke rather episodic memory in students. So in the sense that you don't necessarily say, oh, this is what it is. You guide the students to understand that, oh, this is what it is. You let the students make that assumption. Okay, this is what the concept is. And also you guide, and this is basically something that works exceptionally well for me, but it does also work for other students as well. It's because I'm a very visual thinker. So you kind of like enable the students to remember certain things that they've seen before, and that invokes memory, and that kind of helps them to retain things a lot better. So that's something that I use. That's kind of goes back. I think when you spend another experience, reflection, action, it's kind of
Inherent,
yeah.
Good.
So I come from the university where there's very little training. You're just thrown in the deep end, but there's always a team teaching method where we always only taught our own specialty.
Right.
And so I didn't have to learn about ecology or things that I don't know much about, like say the auditory cortex. It was just what I knew best, and that's what I focused on. And I just focused on conceptualizing for the students so that they didn't have to learn data, dates, kings and queens of England or whatever, but this is what happens, and if you understand the concepts, all those details come back easier. But so coming here, it's been a lot easier to teach. Because it's almost the same model. I'm team teaching. I'm not leading a course and teaching outside of my comfort zone. But what I found here was that I did something very different I hadn't done before. I really enjoyed, and that is medical humanities and ethics. And they epitomize all of this down here.
They really do.
It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
good.
Particularly the interdisciplinary,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think that's the beauty of the humanities groups, right? You have some basic scientists like yourself. Yeah, some people that are truly medical humanities, not even in School of Medicine, in humanities, and then you have physicians
That's right.
that are all
And-
contributing to the conversation.
And they always want the students to write a reflection, and the hardest part of all of that is putting them to speak.
Mhm.
But if you, but this is also true for our graduate students and even postdocs, is getting them to ask questions, because the more they do that, the more they can find their own voice and authentic self, rather than being terrified of being graded all the time. They feel like they're being graded, and so they don't
They are.
speak up, but that act of omission does not reflect well on them as well. So that's what I really want them to talk, and it's hard. It's easy in the medical humanities bit, but I find it harder in our own class, simply because I'm such a didactic speaker. Well, I'm not a presenter. And I need to find a way to do that. 50 minutes to talk about the auditory system from here to up here doesn't give me a lot of time for any of that. It's not like we have enough time.
I've read that once or twice before.
But it seems well received at the time, and most of the questions are on the bits that I'm not at my strongest, like, the difference between the wind and the waiver tests and things like that. And I struggle every year with that, but I don't do it every week. But I love this way that school or the university wants to teach, and it's helped me immensely.
Great, glad to hear. To build on that a little bit, especially since Jason just walked into the room, this is great timing. No, no, but I was gonna share with the group, because when I was reflecting about this earlier. Tony Kincaid is retiring this year, and Tony is really a remarkable because he's been up with Jason for 25 years as a co-investigator. It's a big lift. It's a big lift. But really, he epitomizes this in many ways. Excellence in research and teaching, in the Creighton Jesuit education and the pedagogy, because interdisciplinary research and working with Jason, but also his teaching. He's won more awards here at the university for his teaching than most everybody I know of, and the students. We have our master's students in medical education or medical sciences work with him. and along with PAs, they all have great things because he really takes kind of an interdisciplinary approach, just because he has such a strong breadth. So, yeah, simply we're gonna miss him immensely. That's for sure.
Who was talking about that?
Tony Kincaid.
Oh, right, I was wondering if you were talking about.
Yes.
Right, I missed the name at the beginning, but
Yeah.
yes. Oh,
Sorry.
he's retiring this year?
He is retiring.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness, that would be
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
He is good, I've been on the police system.
Be best. Any questions about the Ignatian pedagogy? I know it was really brief. You know, this is a handout for you to take home and throw away if you want, but it's definitely a desktop primer and a useful resource. Because being at Creighton, often gets questions about what is, you know, Ignatian pedagogy. So I went second year. I know exactly
Ken?
where the file that is. Let me give you the brief description.
Ken, we have a question.
Yes.
Do you ever have resistance from grad students about the Ignatian pedagogy and their reflection and the context and all the different charisms? And if you do, how do you handle that?
Well, that's a multiplex question. So usually students, I haven't, you know, as far as the Jesuit charisms, that usually doesn't get brought up hardly at all. I think most people recognize that that's, you know, why that's the foundation for Creighton, but that doesn't directly impact their learning. It's mostly the Ignatian pedagogy and, you know, the expectation that there is a reflection, not everywhere, not in every course, but in deliberate places. We'll talk about this a little bit here in a couple of slides, but to get at that, answering that question a little bit better is that let's pick on the medical humanities here, because I think this is where we have this expectation that they do a reflection before they come to the session, and that helps them be actively engaged. And then, you know, we have one at the end of the year as well. And so we have reflection built in a couple of different places in the medical humanities, and I would say that having that reflection before they show up to class really forces, for better verb than that, the students to really kind of think about the content that they had to read or watch before they showed up to the session, so that they're much more engaged in the discussion if that wasn't a requirement. So I think the students recognize that. I haven't gotten any pushback about those assignments, maybe because in the first year when we did get a little bit of pushback, we recognized that it wasn't just the activity, it was maybe the length of what we were expecting was a little bit too much. So I think that the bottom line, there's a right time, place, and amount that we can use to kind of tweak it. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Jump ahead. And this is where I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself. Before I was at NIH, I was in Utah at the Huntsman Cancer Institute there as a postdoc. And while I was there, it was hard not to drink the water a little bit. Stephen Covey was, I'm really dating myself now, but his 7 Habits, this was about the time that it was published, or not too long after that. And so kind of resonated with me. The Red Rock definitely is something I've held on to. But this idea of beginning with the end in mind. And as a teacher, this is really pretty foundational to not only what is expected in the School of Medicine when teaching medical students and PA students, but also really good practice in teaching in general. Okay, and that's just to really start with the learning objectives. Okay, and so in the School of Medicine, if you're teaching med students or PAs, somebody, chances are pretty good, somebody has given that session before. So you'll have those learning objectives, or those in the room that had to create them de novo. So thank you when we had to do this several years ago. But the learning objectives, the verbs that are used in these learning objectives tend to fall in this hierarchy of educational learning. Okay, so at its base here, and this is a revised version of Bloom's taxonomy, which has been around for 40 some odd years now, or some longer than that. But at its basis, right, we want everybody to remember and understand. But particularly with our graduate students, our medical students, right, we have much higher expectations than that, right? And so so you can see the 6 different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not going to read them out here. We're going to talk about them again and again. But just generally it moves from remembering the factual information, being able to apply it, and create. Okay, so with this taxonomy of learning objectives, there's a whole different set of verbs that can be used in creating learning objectives, and here's a list. And certainly don't want to you have to memorize any of these. I'm showing this this chart as an example. With our graduate students or and our medical students, there's a lot of verbs up here that we expect them to be competent at doing by the time they graduate. Right? We expect them to be able to write. Right? We expect them to be able to defend and judge. Okay, evaluate the results. Okay, and my point here is with Bloom's taxonomy. Transitioning a student, a graduate student, from the basics, from the remembering, to the creating doesn't happen overnight, right? This isn't earth science, but one thing I think what happens, a mistake that I often see in the classroom, is that we do a lot of lecturing here. Here's a lot of content. Okay, and then the exam might be somewhere up here, okay? And we don't give the students the tools to make that transition. We don't have to necessarily hit every level here making that transition, but we got to give them something to get from the content, to being able to use that content. So how do we do that? Well, that'll be your instructional strategies. What I want to do before we get to that, it's got a really useful little tool. So that might just be informative. Make sure I got one for everybody here.
Apparently I need a noise.
I got it. I didn't think I was going to have so many people. All right, so so what you have is a slider. In fact, can I borrow yours for just a second? So first of all, recognize that there are 2 sides to this, okay? And on slide 1, so if you're confused, in the lower right-hand corner, it says side 1, the other one says side 2, okay? So there are 6 levels total, right, with the Bloom's taxonomy, and there is 3 on each side of the slider. Okay, so starts with remember here on the top left on slide 1, and you can work it down to the 3rd level there, apply, and then if you flip it over, you see the other 3 all the way to create. Okay, so this really useful tool that we're going to use today not only gives you some outcome verbs, some learning objective verbs that you can use in creating those learning objectives, but also, as you can see, some assessment question prompts and suggestions for instructional activity to reach those objectives. Okay, so from this round. All right, so what I'd like to do is to, let me back a second, I got ahead of myself, I did have one point here that I wanted to make. In that transitioning, right, we want them to be able to master these, but if we spend too much time at the lower level giving them lots of that data, they're gonna become bored and apathetic, getting to what Garrett and I were talking about before, right? You can see it on their faces, right? Oh my gosh, this is a lot of information, but I can't put it all together. So, using strategies in the classroom to help them make that bridge is definitely important. Got my picture here didn't transfer. All right, so what we're gonna do, so we're gonna use some time here to come up with some learning objectives for a couple of different examples, right? So use that little tool. I'm going to use an example. We've got, first of all, say we've got a course that you're going to, or a class that you're going to give on genetic screening. Okay, and so I'm using that example because I hope everybody here in the age of genetic screening is at least familiar, right, with what are some learning objectives that might be important. So I'd like everybody here just to come up with one learning objective that you would expect, first of all, an undergraduate student to be able to achieve. Okay, what's one learning objective that an undergraduate student would need from a course on genetic screening?
Simple, just what is the definition of a gene?
Definition of the gene, I love it. Okay. So your learning objective, how would you word it? What is the definition of a gene? Or is there an active verb that we could use there?
Define
There you
what
go.
constitutes a gene.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah. And that what level of blooms would that be at?
Just be remembering.
Yeah, remembering. Absolutely. Okay. Any others? Model systems. Okay. What about model systems?
What different models would you use? Models.
Okay. So what verb would you use there? Learning objective for a first year for an undergraduate student.
Like assessment.
List?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say. Okay. What else?
Why do we do genetic? Why need to learn genetics? Like what for?
Okay, so what would be your verb? You can use your little cheat sheet there. Yeah, I can go back to that.
Question or relate?
Relate.
Yeah.
Relate why we do that, or okay. What would you want them to relate it to?
The application.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I get that.
Might be two other ones for undergrads.
Right. Right. That's why we're gonna have this discussion, right? So it might be a little bit advanced, but at the same time, I can, especially here at Creighton, where most, I don't know percentages nowadays, but a lot of our students, right, where they want to go on to professional schools, right? And so they're going to be looking for that application, right? They would, that's part of the reason, they're interested in science. So you might, at least being able to maybe explain, I think that's certainly a reasonable expectation.
How to pass from DNA to RNA to protein.
I'm sorry?
How to pass from DNA to RNA to protein.
Good, the central dogma,
That would be applied.
apply, good. All right, so now what about for our graduate students?
Evaluate.
Evaluate.
Or design, create.
Create what? What are we gonna create?
design
Create a-
strategy.
A strategy. Love it.
I mean, I taught genetics with
Yes.
selections for the,
Yep,
and I think you guys also have similar topics for the methods class.
yes, yeah, and we had a little bit related in the research methods. Not exactly, but yeah.
That's more advanced for the graduate student. Spend most of the time telling them some examples. It's still a bit difficult when they try to evaluate or come up with a strategy to actually screen for some of the type.
Yeah.
It's very advanced.
All right, so let's let's definitely put a pin in that one, because I like to come back to that one when we talk about educational strategies in the classroom for something that advanced. All right, but I like that one.
I like what you're saying, but that's with the end in mind.
Yeah. Mhm.
And but to
Thank you.
get there, they need to be able to articulate what they're doing
Good.
before they can even get there.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, to help fill the gap, you'd want them to do something more in the middle there, like analyze, so. In order to, create or design, they need to understand basic methodologies, so you can give them results and ask them to analyze those results. To demonstrate that they understand methodologies.
I fully agree. So even in putting together the learning objectives, being kind of stepwise in what the expectations are, that might be great for as kind of the end objective for the entire session, but having something intermediate, I think would be good. Any other learning objectives for a session on genetic screening?
I'm not so familiar with genetic screening, but generally for screening, there are multiple techniques. At least the students should know what's the difference.
Mhm.
Pro and cons for different techniques.
Okay, so pro and cons, that's great. So pro and cons, what verbs up here would be really good if you wanted them to be able to describe? Okay, describes all the way down here with remember, but you're expecting something more, I think, right?
Yes, they need to compare different technique.
Okay, so even, compare is one level up, but is that just it?
And also, eventually we want them to apply it in their own projects.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
So they, based on for different animal models or models, and to choose the right one or the best one. Then now they need to analyze what's their actual work, what's their projects focusing on, and then make their choice.
Mhm.
So, it's
So you hit on a lot of verbs here that at several different levels, right? So in creating a learning objective for a session during that, we'll call it a first year graduate student, you know, we want to get them to be able to do this with their project. What level do you think would be best just for, and I'm not picking on you, but what level do you think would be best for that first year graduate student in a course? I'm not saying it's wrong that we wouldn't get them in a hypothetical situation to have to evaluate or analyze, right? I mean, that way we can start learning, because kind of like we were talking about before, more experience we have in analyzing and evaluating, certainly the better we're going to be at when we expect a student to be able to create when they walk out the door.
They need to be able to differentiate which will be either the right screen or the wrong approach to get to where they want to go. And so this screen may not serve their purpose because they have a particular goal in mind, but that other screen over there that does something different, that focuses on say protein translation, is a better screen, so they can not only analyze the screening methods that are there, but they can also assess whether this screening method or that screening method will help them get to the answer they're seeking.
Yes, I would agree. Like, distinguish is one of my favorite verbs
Yeah.
to use, right? Because it's more of the apply. I was looking, I don't see it on this list that I grabbed, but you know, it expects an analyzing kind of level, at least my opinion here. You know, a graduate student should be able to do that. In my opinion, during first year course, right? If not, be able to do some of these other things. Good.
Shouldn't do this, right? Regardless of what it's the first grad student or undergrad, should you just first identify what thing is defined what the
Sure.
Yeah, shouldn't you just first question?
So great question. So in building a set of learning objectives for a session, my suggestion is that you need to incorporate several levels. You don't want to have 10. Well, you could have 10 to 12 learning objectives, essentially one for every handful of slides. And that way, it's very obvious to the student or how you are going to get from an understanding, to being able to apply and evaluate and create. So yeah, I like to, especially with graduate students, using several different levels and have them grouped together in a very deliberate way.
That's what I do in our graduate school courses for our second year grad students to have analyze, evaluate, and create. Here's a piece of data from a paper, analyze it. Then what do you think it needs? Evaluate it. Next, design experiments to follow up on it, create. Yeah. That's.
I'm assuming the ultimate aim at the end of the graduate program is for them to be be able to create. So, but this is a whole process.
I get it.
First, it will be like.
Yep. Totally agree. That makes sense with learning objectives. Where we start. We just defining what we expect of our students, and more importantly, what we want to get out of that session. All right, so let's move on to assessment. In the school medicine, we have a series of program objectives, EPOs. That's what we call them. Brief summary of the headlines for these program objectives. And each each graduate program is also expected to have some objectives. You just got yours evaluated, right?
We're still preparing ourselves study.
Okay. Well,
It's gonna be an issue.
it is. Our masters in medical sciences just got evaluated 2 weeks ago. And yeah, so you have to have program objectives for that graduate program. And in reality, the learning objectives are supposed to map for each session, are supposed to map to the course objectives, to match to the program objectives. In a perfect world, that's what our accrediting agencies expect. In graduate school, I get that that's a work in progress, even that's what's that. My point here is really not to dwell in that, okay? My point here is that what we're trying to assess are these program objectives, and we're assessing a lot of different things, okay? From that knowledge all the way down to habits, and more germane to or more directly associated with what we were just talking about. We expect in the graduate students, right, that they should be able to create, analyze, those kinds of things. Okay. The point here is that we really need to use multiple methods when it comes to assessment to evaluate our students. Okay. In our graduate programs, we use a lot of open-ended questions. It's good to have, in my opinion, to have a combination of assessments though in those questions. So some of them can be more factually based, whereas others are more, evaluate, analyze, create. And that way we can get an idea where those students, how far along they are in where we expect them to be. All right, so now using our little slidey tool there, now we're going to be looking at the middle one, okay? The assessment question. So we go back here to our objectives. Let's say that we have a learning objective related to the screening, right? That we want them to be able to design a screening method. Okay, what kind of assessment question would be really effective? What prompt there from the sliding tool in the far away? And if you've done something in the past in an assessment that you don't necessarily see in this prompt, I'd love to hear it.
So I like to ask the students, and if they say failure, say, okay, what do you think? What's the reason for the failure? So think about it. Maybe with a new design, the experimental strategies.
Yeah.
So what's the possible reasons for success or failures?
One I like to do is get that artifacts, particularly in like for example, immunofluorescence. You can get an artifact with design an experiment that you can do with controls to determine if this is an artifact. That's like my last question in my series.
And just maybe a comment too, like in your first slide, what's the end of the road? So I think, training our graduate students, it isn't so much about kind of the content of the course per se, but it's this method of thought. It's a scientist asking questions, developing hypotheses, testing it. It just applies universally to what you're doing at the bench, what you're doing in class. So how can you design kind of classroom activities to foster that type of mindset, to change the way they think, see the world?
It's a good segue, that's where we're going next. No, you're all good.
It's what we always just generally refer to as critical thinking skills.
Yes, yeah. Yep, absolutely. All right, let's switch it around. What about if we wanted them to analyze? What would be a good? We give them some data, and we want them to analyze that. What would be a good assessment question that you might use for analyzing? It can be the genetic screening or something else you've got experience with.
What does it mean?
What does it mean? Yeah.
What's the difference between group A and group B?
Yeah.
So relationship.
All of the questions used in assessment because they're specific, right? Depending on that, right? But you're expecting a very specific outcome from that.
Well, for me, as researchers, so this is different from medical. Perhaps we wouldn't want this in medical school.
Sure, we'll get there. Yes.
That we want students to ask questions. And I found that undergraduates want to receive knowledge.
Uh-huh.
They don't want to ask questions because they think it's authoritative. And but that's what got me into university, because I was flunking everything else until I asked my interviewer, well, why is this piece of coral pink? And he couldn't answer the question. And he told me like that's what got me in, even though I wasn't doing very well with everything else. And that's what that's what my philosophy is, that we've got to be able to ask questions. And it's a very subversive act in and of itself. But if we want a career as researchers, we have to
get them to do it. Oh, and together with what Jason was saying, that gets at, what do we do in the classroom, right? To create that. So let's go ahead and jump to that one, since that seems to be a recurring theme here. All right, so this is the beginning with the end in mind. Okay, our objectives, how we're going to assess. You don't always have to create those assessments before you start putting together the session. Though I tell you this a few times that I have, it's definitely helpful. It can be a little problematic because you end up being a little focused in how you're delivering the information. But that notwithstanding, usually the outcomes are pretty good. All right, so we want to get at let's start with that analyzing part. We want them to be able to analyze some data. What are some classroom activities we can do to improve?
I'm not going to say anything.
One
It'd be
thing,
very mean of me to do that.
one thing we do a lot in class, GeoLookup is asking students, okay, this is the paper, this is the data. What's wrong with the data?
Yeah.
So ask them to check the data. What's wrong with it?
So what, I agree, one of the great strengths of journal clubs, right, you're looking at lots of examples, solid examples, having the students analyze that data, right, in those examples. So, if we're giving a lecture or, other more didactic session though, including some examples, right? And directing the students to do it either in class or outside of class, right? Those are really important tools or strategies rather to get them to do that.
Actually, that's actually, the data club in the center is another way that we can get the students to use their own data to start being able to do this and get the feedback on their own data and interpretations. We want to do this in a friendly environment. That's the whole point of the data club. While we have struggled the past few months with getting enough people to come forward, it certainly is a better atmosphere in which these discussions are taking place, and we just need to continue to encourage them to come forward, because it's their own data which, so they should be very motivated and invested in making sure that their data is not only well prepared, but they sort of things from their own perspective and see these other perspectives and somehow incorporate them into it. I'm beginning to see how we can make Data Club more effective.
It's hard, right? It's hard to make that jump from giving a critical analysis of somebody anonymous to everybody in the room. That data versus somebody in the room versus your own, right? There's definitely a humility that comes with it, right? We've all experienced that, or I suspect that we all have. I know I have plenty of times. And so, yeah, I agree. It's important for our students to learn how to do it. First year graduate students usually pretty resistant, right? To opening themselves up to that.
That's true. I mean, I think they will do it for the thesis committee.
Sure, absolutely.
Because they've got no choice.
Yeah.
But if they can make that jump from the thesis committee to a more social construct,
Right.
like Data Club,
yeah,
they'll find it more rewarding because they're not being graded.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least I hope they're not being graded in Data Club. Are they being graded in Data Club? No. So yeah, it should. I hope it will make it a more engaging environment.
We're trying to do that in medical education.
It's for me, like, it's just about having a balance between being self-critical and also being self-confident.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's kind
that's
of very important. So I guess one of the probably the ways would be, at least for me, having this one, is to put yourself out there first in front of the students and say, well, this is what I did, and here's on hindsight how I might.
Mhm.
So that kind of fosters an environment where I help kind of being self-critical and also trying to change the way that we get so that maybe that might kind of foster an environment where they're not really, oh, this is what I have to do, kind of go monotropic, but also kind of are aware of other things and other perspectives. So yeah,
It's good. All right, one more question here about instructional strategies. Now, we really want our students to get to creating part, right? Which certainly in the lab, that's an expectation. But what can we do in the classroom setting to get them to start to create?
So to follow up, I think it's kind of lead by example. So in classes, let's say you are creating experiments, looking at a figure, ask students to evaluate it, and then you start discussing as a group, okay, here's how we're going to pursue some series of experiments. Kind of lead the discussion. You get 15 minutes into it, it's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. And
Holy cow, is that valuable?
Yeah, after you have like that first discussion, you know, a lot of, especially the newer students, are like, oh, wow, the professor doesn't even know what's going on. I mean, they go down dead ends too. It's like, that's just part of the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And after you have a few of those types of discussions, then the students, I think, are more willing to take chances because they've seen you do the same thing.
Yeah.
Go down a road, it's like, oh,
Totally
here's a dead end, we're gonna go back and we're gonna start over again.
Totally.
I think, I mean, I might be throwing out those words, but whatever. That's, I think that's really, really important. Because what I think is like, as a PI, if you put your vulnerability to an extent in front of the students will feel that, you know, the place is a safe place.
Yeah.
And that's kind of very important for the students to feel that whatever they're contributing is valid. And whatever way.
We have running jokes in my labs about these great ideas I had come back from meetings, like, you gotta try this, It's just an epic failure. And 6-7 years later, the like teasing about, remember that experiment? But it gets your trainees to just throw things out there.
Yeah.
I have to say, that would be great.
Yeah, I love that.
I think we all fundamentally learn by example to expect somebody to run off and be innovative, try something new. They have to just learn from others, ongoing process to get there. So you know, like data clever, scenes and scenes, and understanding how to evaluate and use that experience in development design applications. So there's lots of examples. You know, students all sat around, didn't go to journal clubs, didn't present their work to a larger group of committee. They would have a really hard time making that jump, eventually being independent, creative, innovative scientists.
All right, so my take home here, right, is that we need to be deliberate in that whole design, all those steps of the design of what we're gonna do in the classroom, right? From the learning objectives, assessment, instructional strategies. I mean, whether you're doing instructional strategy design before assessment, that really doesn't matter, but make sure that those are aligned, right? And that while you don't necessarily have to worry about getting through each step, okay, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to necessarily have each of these steps to get to a creation. Going from, all the way from an understanding here to a creation. For a first year graduate student or first year medical student, that's a big jump, and in my opinion, not very successful. Okay, so I hope that slider tool, you find that as useful as I have this for you to take on here. You can have that one, and in your design. So I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes here just talking about some active learning strategies. Let me back. Some active learning strategies that to use in the classroom. So why? Let's first start with why. Why do we need to do active learning strategies in the classroom? They, talk there about their utility and really helping those students reach those higher order objectives. But it's based on a whole lot of data here. So I listed here some of the more fundamental observations that have been made over the last 25 years or so. Really fundamental here was a PNAS paper that came out not 10 years ago about, this was a meta-analysis from a lot of different studies. I don't remember exactly how many, But what they found was that student performance was significantly higher in classrooms that use some kind of active learning approach. You can see some other things, and one of the more interesting, more recent observations is that these differences persist. So this figure on the right-hand side is data in which 100 level introductory to biology course was initially for many years just taught as a straight lecture. And then for 5 years, and so here on the left-hand side, this would be the average grades in the 200 level courses from students in that era. Okay, so in the 100 level course, all they had was lecture. Okay, 200 level course, they did pretty well. Okay, but what they did back in 2013 or 2014 was to change that introductory course so that some students had an active learning, and they didn't have the choice. They were assigned to different groups, and so some groups did the active learning approach. Others did more standard lecture. There were some other variables there. What they found was when they looked at the 200 level courses, not only was it making a difference in the 100 level courses, but the 200 level courses, those students that had done active learning, on average, were doing much better than students that had lecture in that 100 level course. So that they were getting much better foundation, essentially, in moving forward in their understanding of that introductory material. Okay. So we know that active learning is important, even in introductory courses. So I'm going to give you 4 examples here in the next 10 minutes, just real briefly. More than anyone, I want to introduce these. I'm not going to go into detail on these, given the time. I want to introduce these. If you're interested in any of these, let me know. I'd be happy to help you incorporate these into your classroom activities. So I asked ChatGPT here to create what I thought was an active learning classroom for college students, and I didn't find any examples of 6 fingers, because I don't think I've heard that that's a real issue, right, with ChatGPT and creating figures of people. But in any case, you can see lots of different approaches, most of them small group activities, and so. So in its simplest form, these 4 different examples kind of increase in their complexity, which you can use. Just incorporating some formative questions in the classroom is the easiest approach to do. You can also flip what's called flip the classroom. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. Game-based learning and thinking week things. These are all things that we do to varying degrees with the med students. So I'll give you some examples. So formative questions, you know, you don't have to use any fancy software, right? You can certainly just give them a question, whether it's multiple choice or open-ended, and they can answer themselves. But what's been shown is that most of the significant learning occurs when a student gets to an answer, all right? So whether it's, you know, if you're just showing a question, that's fine. But they should commit to something, especially writing it down or in a multiple choice selecting it. Okay, the data shows that that's where the real learning occurs. Okay, I use Poll Everywhere to the software program. There are a lot of different tools that can be used in Poll Everywhere, from simple multiple choice word clouds. I love Q&A, so you ask for a response, and then once the first couple of responses come in, people can up or down vote them. And it's a great way to get a consensus from a room. Now, if it's a smaller classroom, you know, that's not all that informative. But with larger classrooms, it's really helpful. In Anonymous, I told you that. I also do histology, so clickable images are awesome, you know, to assess where they are in their understanding. You can see some other examples. So, you know, if you're interested in using Poll Everywhere, just let me know. The university is also considering, well, the university has moved to also adopting another platform. School of Medicine may, we'll see, but regardless, there's a that's a really useful tool.
Quick question about this. Are the instructional designers paid for by the university or was the course have to pay for?
Great question. That hasn't been asked before. I think right now, it's still there. So instructional designers are live in two different places. We have a couple specific to the School of Medicine. Okay, and I'm sure that they would be happy if you have a graduate course. You want some help in creating full everywhere questions. They would help you with that. There are also some in the Center for Faculty Excellence. All right, there are at least two in there. So they would certainly help as well. Yeah. Flipped classroom. I use this a lot, particularly in the introductory courses where you're just trying to get a broad enough funnel. Okay, you know that students are coming from a lot of different places where their depth and breadth of knowledge is very different. So rather than give a lecture on material that probably, at least some percentage of the group has heard before, give it as a pre-work. So Kurt does this too with the first year medical students. But give it to them in videos or reading assignments ahead of time, and then spend the in-classroom time with some kind of, whether it's a series of questions like in the poll everywhere, I've done that before, or some of these other techniques. And that way you really make it a real learning experience for everybody, not just the ones that have never had that topic. Okay. So yeah, there's some challenges and benefits. Happy to talk about that. Just want to make sure we're out of here on time. Game-based learning definitely has its place too. We have a couple of people that like to use bingo. Jeopardy is also a very popular one. Dr. Delcourt, our Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education, does Jeopardy every year with our students in this cardiology course. They love it. It's remarkable how many students show up every year. There's brownie points involved there, but as to why they're showing up. But they really find it valuable. So using games, there's lots of different ways to do it, but it really can be directly tied with some good planning to specific learning objectives. Okay. And then finally, thinking with things is an approach, especially as an anatomist, that I like to do. I had the opportunity to teach in Rwanda in February, and I'm just using them as an example because they said okay to getting their pictures taken. As students, they're a little resistant sometimes when I do this. But Play-Doh, it turns out that while they looked at me like, Play-Doh, we're really going to use Play-Doh today? That's a universal response for medical students, no matter whether they're in Rwanda or the US. They definitely gravitate towards it, given a little bit of time. And universally, there is a lot of aha moments. So I have them, I do this with both students here in Rwanda. There we go. And now it's not gonna, oh, it's all right. Anyways, I have them make sensory and motor nerves, and then I ask them to put them together in the spinal nerve, how they would be organized. See them thinking about this and trying to line them up. And when they finally get it right, they're like, oh, this makes so much sense. It's not, you got to be selective. Okay, I guess is my point. If there are topics that students struggle with, and this is definitely one of them every year, they just really struggle with a spinal nerve. What components are in spinal nerves, roots and rami, and so being selective, being deliberate here is really important. All right, so I'm just going to end with this slide, with the curriculum part of those slides. Don't worry about that objective. But you know, so this would be an example of a poll everywhere. I didn't activate it. I love the QR art, by the way. But you know, what do you think are some barriers then to using active learning? Yeah, like a classroom.
People are gonna say, I only have 50 minutes, I don't have time.
Yeah, time.
I got all this material.
Yep.
That's 20 years of PowerPoints, I don't wanna change.
I may have heard that once or twice before, yes. Yep. So change in general, but
Yeah.
change because of the amount of time that's involved in creating it and producing it, right? I agree. Certainly goes on, along the lines with what you're saying too. Good. What else?
Lack of experience in trying to develop something like this.
Yeah, and that takes a little bit of humility, right? To try something new in front of students. It's one thing to try them with, you know, somewhere where you don't see the students every day, versus ones, you know, a larger audience. Absolutely agree with that.
I'm gonna say fear of the unknown, and I'm gonna go back to my point that we all learn by example. If
Yeah.
you've never seen somebody using this or
Yeah.
doing this,
Yeah.
you're not gonna run off and do it yourself.
So now you've seen I've done Play-Doh.
That was what I was thinking, it's like,
Yeah. I did a session here with through Center for Faculty Excellence, where we had people create with Play-Doh or whatever they had, and so if you're hesitant, I guess the bottom line is, you know, I'd be happy to direct you to somebody that does do that kind of thing, so that if you want to sit on that session or talk to them about their experiences, you know, happy to help there.